It is my privilege to be with you folks once again this day, and it's a joy that my wife and I look forward to every time that we're able to come over here and be with you. Now, I don't know what you think about it, but I think it's a pretty day outside. Now, a lot of people would say, no, it's not, and I can understand those that may have flooding problems. I've got a sister that's got that issue. But you know, in the middle of August, when it's 100 degrees outside, you're going to be glad that this rain fell to keep you with water, especially those of you who have your own wells at your home and you're not on a city system. But it's good to see all of you here today. To those that are watching us on the digital format, we're glad that you're here, you're watching us. We would hope that if you're living in the area, that you'd be able to come and worship with us sometime and enjoy the service that way. There's just something to being with brothers and sisters in Christ, the fellowship, the laughing, the talking about things that are happening, whether it's in the community or in the country, or even questions from the Bible that we sometimes discuss. That is just a little bit better when you're able to be here. But if you're not able, we're still glad that you're joining us on the Facebook or whatever the format might be that you're watching. Last time I was here, we talked about the 12 apostles in general. Just kind of looked some highlights, maybe brought up some things that you didn't think about, or no, we didn't get into all those specifics. We're going to talk about Simon, also known as Peter. He's probably of the original 12, if not the most thought of, probably one of the top two, with John being the other one. But we're going to take the time to look at Simon Peter this day. His name, of course, as we know it, his given name wasn't Peter. His given name was Simon, which is a derivative of the Old Testament name of Simeon. Now, Simeon, if we were to take the time to go back over to Genesis chapter 29, verses 31 through 33, we would find that listed that he is the second son of Jacob and Leah. If you remember the story of Jacob, he met Rebekah, wanted to marry her. He worked 7 years for what he thought was Rebekah, but when the time period was over, as their customs were, he was given Leah for wife. It says that Leah, basically, we would say she was not as pretty as Rachel. I think I said Rebecca, but I meant Rachel. And because she wasn't loved by Jacob, Leah wasn't, that the Lord opened her womb but closed her sister's. She had the son of Simeon. He was the second one. The Greek name that we use is Simon. That's how we have that happen to be in the New Testament. The meaning of the name is he has heard, or it's what Leah said. God has heard. He has heard that I was unloved. And he had given her that's this point in time, a second son. It wasn't uncommon for God to change names in the Old Testament. He changed the name of Abram to Abraham, to Sarai to Sarah, to Jacob to Israel, just to name a few. Christ changed Peter's name, changed Simon's name to Cephas, or as we would say today, Peter. It means a stone. Now, I've got on the board there a couple of commentaries that I oftentimes look at and do research from. This one is from a gentleman named Ellicott. He puts this statement on it, which I think clears up maybe and maybe makes it a little bit easier. As Jesus looks at him, Mr. Ellicott said, "Thou art now hearer," or Simon, Okay? And then he goes on and he says, the son of Jehovah's grace, referring to the name that Leah had given. But from henceforth thou shalt be called Rockman, or Cephas. Burton Kaufman in his commentary tells us that Cephas is a Syriac word, and it is the equivalent to the Greek word of Petros, which we render as Peter. Both names mean a portion of a rock. Petra is also can be used from Cephas. Petra means a rock. Jesus did not call Peter Petros. He would have called him, as we have it here, Petros, a piece of a rock. Peter was the latter, not the former. Simon's name was changed from hearer to Petros, or Peter, small rock or stone. We could name things for Peter from now till sundown, and we would not cover all the things that you would read in the New Testament. But a few of them tells us that Peter and his brother Andrew were fishermen. They were called by Jesus. Peter was married. We know that because it says that Jesus healed his mother-in-law. Matthew, the 14th chapter. Let's go over there for just a second. I want to read a little bit from this passage. Talks about the time where Peter walked on the water. Now, sometimes Peter gets a bum rap on this, a bum rap that I don't think he deserves. When you go to Matthew chapter 14, beginning at verse 25. Now it was in the fourth watch of the night, Jesus went to them walking on the sea. So in other words, in the boat, which Jesus had told them to get in earlier back there in verse 22, as they were going across the water when nighttime came, certain fellows had a watch, probably 2 hours each. And we were in the fourth watch of the night. And in fact, when you go back to verse 24, it talks about the fact that it was out in the middle of the sea, tossed, and the winds were contrary. In other words, the winds were going against the way they were going. And it was the fourth watch, and in verse 26, they see Jesus walking to him on the sea. They are troubled. It's a ghost. What do you think we would have thought? Would we have thought anything different? Oh, well, we're too sophisticated in this day and age. We know there are no ghosts. Well, if you're out there in the middle of the water and you see someone walking to it, you're going to probably change your mind in a hurry. They cried out, "It's a ghost." They cried out for fear. And immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Be of good cheer. It is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." And when Peter had come down out of the boat, he walked on the water to go to Jesus. But when he saw the wind was boisterous, he was afraid, beginning to sink. And he cried out, saying, "Lord, save me." I want to stop us right there. I want to go back to the verse. Peter looks out there and he sees and he hears Jesus' voice. Peter, James, and John, we know those three, it seemed, had an unusual relationship with Jesus. Oftentimes when Jesus did things, he took the three of them, as when he did on the Mount of Transfiguration. In this case, Peter's the only one who speaks up. He said, "Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you." And Jesus went, "Okay, come on out." And what did Peter do? He stepped out and walked on the water. Now, we oftentimes talk about the fact that, he sunk. Well, we'll get to that in a minute. But he walked on the water. How far? We don't know. Was it as as far as me to this front pew? Was it as far as me to the back of the building? Was it as far as me to the other end of the lot over here? All we know is he had Jesus in sight. He could see Jesus, and Jesus said, come out and walk. And Peter walked. We have no idea how far, but he did something that none of the other disciples there in that boat, the 11 of them, had enough courage to do, and that was get out of the boat. So now let's go back to verse 30. And when Peter saw that the wind was boisterous, he was afraid and began to sink. And he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him, and said unto him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? Now stop and think about that. He had walked somewhere. 4, 5 steps, 100 steps, we don't know. But for whatever reason, he took his eyes off of Jesus. And he began to sink because he wasn't looking at what he needed to look at. He looked down and he began to sink. But then he had the rightness of mind to say, Lord, save me. Help. Years ago, I heard Dr. James Dobson on one of his programs talk about his son. His son was about 3, maybe 4. And his son had somehow got up onto the back of his father's truck. But then he wanted to get down. And he's standing there on the back of the truck, Dr. Dobson said, as I walked out and saw him. He's taking his foot and trying to find the ground. And he can't find the ground, and he says, help the boy. Somebody help the boy. Well, that's kind of Peter here. He says, Lord, save me. He went right back to the point that he needed to go, where he needed to keep his vision all the time, which was the Lord. He said, Lord, save me. And Jesus stretched out his hand. So that's how close Jesus is to Peter now. He's walked far enough that he's within arm's reach. And he reaches out his hand and he catches Peter. And he asks him, why did you doubt? Why did you doubt? Oh, you of little faith. And then something unusual happens. Peter walked on the water a second time. He's out with Jesus away from the boat. He's sinking. Now, how's he going to get back? Jesus throw him over his shoulder? No. They went back to the boat because at verse 32, and when they had gotten into the boat, they were evidently some distance away, and they walked back to the boat. When they got into the boat, the wind ceased. Peter walked on the water twice. Nobody else did. Now, I like to think that many of us have walked on water. Many of us have fallen on water because it's called ice. But it's not the same thing as what was here. That was liquid. We walk on solid, frozen water. I know. Keep my day job. Jokes just don't work with me. All right, let's continue on. What else did Peter do? We know that Peter's confessed Jesus as Lord and Savior. And when he said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, Jesus looked at him and said, this is the confession that we're talking about. This is what the rock is. Peter, you're not the rock. Upon this rock, upon what? Upon Peter's confession that Christ was the Son of God. He said, upon this rock. And we go back to that earlier thing that we had on here. Let me go back, wrong way. Where we looked at the words, Petros and Petra. Jesus said, you are Petros, a piece of rock. but upon the Petra, your confession that I am the Son of the living God. And he will build his church. So he confessed God, Christ as the Son of God. Continuing on. Shortly after this, we find that after Peter has made the confession that thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, Jesus has to rebuke him. Because Jesus had told him, I'm going to Jerusalem, I'm going